Jake Morrison stood in the cold preparation room and looked through the thick glass window. On the other side was a maze made entirely of ice. The walls were tall and white, reaching high into the air like frozen mountains. The floor looked smooth and shiny like a mirror made of ice. He was nervous but also excited. Back home in Minnesota, Jake had spent every winter on frozen lakes. He played hockey with his friends and went ice skating with his family. The cold was not scary to him. It was like an old friend that he knew well. Around him, his classmates from other planets looked worried. Very worried. Sixithera was from the planet Vega. She looked like a giant insect with long legs and big eyes that showed many reflections. Her hard shell was already making small clicking sounds, which Jake had learned meant she was scared. Next, to her stood Gralt Moon from the planet Draknar. His skin was covered in blue scales that were slowly turning pale. His people were like reptiles, and Jake knew they did not like cold weather at all. On his other side was Nyxara from Centauri. She looked like she was made of crystal, with light shining through her clear skin. Even she seemed worried, and her people lived on a planet with ice and snow. The Galactic Academy was the best school in the galaxy. Students came from hundreds of different worlds to study here. The building was huge and beautiful, with towers that reached toward the stars. Jake felt lucky to be here, but he also felt different from everyone else. Most of the other students came from planets with perfect weather. Their worlds had the same temperature all year long. They never had to deal with snow or ice or freezing wind. For them, this test was going to be very hard. Professor Kelmtar floated at the front of the room. She was from the water world of Aquarius and looked like a big octopus with many arms. Her tentacles moved in the air as she talked, and her voice came through the translation machines that helped everyone understand each other. "Students, listen carefully," she said. Her tentacles curled and uncurled with excitement. "Today you will face the ice maze trial. This is one of the hardest tests we have at the Academy." The room became very quiet. Even the usual humming and clicking sounds that alien students made stopped completely. "The maze is made entirely of ice," and Professor Kelmtar continued. "The temperature inside is -40 degrees. That is cold enough to freeze water instantly. You must reach the center of the maze and find the data crystal that is hidden there." Jake watched as his classmates became more and more frightened. Sixithera's antennae drooped down like wilted flowers. Gralt Moon's scales turned even paler, almost white now. Some of the other students started whispering to each other in their own languages. "You have 2 hours to complete this trial," the professor said. "The maze will change its shape every 30 minutes, so you cannot simply memorize the path. You must think quickly and adapt to new situations." Jake looked at the maze again. He could see that the ice walls were thick and tall. There were different levels, with bridges connecting different sections. It looked complicated, but Jake was not worried. He was thinking about something else entirely. The floor of the maze was perfectly smooth. It looked like the ice rinks where he used to play hockey. In his mind, Jake could already see himself moving across that ice, using the walls to push off and gain speed, sliding around corners like he was skating. His classmates saw a dangerous obstacle course. Jake saw the biggest skating rink he had ever been on. "This test will show us how well you can adapt to harsh environments," Professor Kelmtar explained. "Many of you come from worlds with stable climates. This will challenge you in ways you have never experienced before." The other students looked at their thick winter suits. The suits had heaters and air systems to keep them warm and alive in the freezing maze. Jake noticed that his classmates were already turning up their heaters and they were not even in the maze yet. Jake had grown up in Minnesota where winter lasted for months. He had walked to school in snowstorms. He had played outside when it was so cold that his breath turned to fog instantly. He had spent entire days on frozen lakes, skating and playing hockey until his fingers were numb. The cold was not his enemy. It was something he understood. "Remember," Professor Kelmtar said, "this is not just about surviving the cold. You must solve problems, work together, and think creatively. The maze will test your body and your mind." As the professor spoke, Jake noticed something that made him smile. The walls of the maze were not just smooth, they were angled in interesting ways. He could see curves and slopes that would be perfect for building speed and momentum. It was like someone had designed the maze specifically for ice skating. The doors to the preparation room began to open. Cold air rushed in, making all the alien students shiver and step backward. Jake felt the cold air hit his face and took a deep breath. It reminded him of winter mornings back home, when the air was so clean and fresh that it made him feel completely awake. "Good luck, students," Professor Kelmtar said. "Remember that the goal is not just to reach the center, but to learn something about yourselves and your abilities." Jake adjusted his thermal suit and checked his equipment one last time. Unlike his classmates, who were bundled up like they were going to the coldest place in the universe, Jake felt comfortable and ready. As they walked toward the entrance to the maze, Jake could hear his classmates talking nervously to each other. "How are we supposed to walk on ice?" Zixthara asked, her voice shaking. "My people have never dealt with anything this cold," Gralt Moon said. "I do not think I can survive 2 hours in there." "We should stay together," Nexara suggested. "Work as a team and help each other." Jake listened to their worried conversations and felt sorry for them. They were all smart and talented, but they had never learned to love the cold like he had. They saw the maze as something that would hurt them. Jake saw it as something that would set him free. The entrance to the maze was right in front of them now. Beyond the doorway, Jake could see the shining ice walls and the perfectly smooth floor. He could already imagine himself gliding across that surface, moving faster than any of his classmates could even walk. This was going to be interesting. Jake stepped onto the ice and felt his body change instantly. His knees bent a little, his weight spread out evenly, and his feet found their balance. It was like coming home. Every muscle in his body remembered thousands of hours spent on frozen lakes and hockey rinks back in Minnesota. Behind him, his classmates were having a very different experience. Zixthara took one careful step onto the ice and immediately started sliding. Her long insect legs spread out in all directions as she tried to stay upright. Her compound eyes went wide with panic as she flailed her arms, trying to grab onto something solid. "By the 7 moons of Vega," she cried out, her voice high and scared. "How does anyone move on this terrible surface?" Gralt Moon was having even more trouble. His scaled feet had no grip on the smooth ice at all. He managed to take 3 small steps before his legs slipped out from under him completely. He fell hard, sliding across the ice until he crashed into the nearest wall with a loud thump. "This is impossible," he groaned, his breath coming out in white puffs even though his thermal suit was supposed to keep him warm. "No living creature can walk on this." Jake turned around to help his friend. He glided smoothly across the ice, his movements controlled and easy. When he reached Gralt Moon, he extended his hand and pulled the blue-scaled alien back to his feet. "Here," Jake said gently. "Keep your center low and take smaller steps. Do not fight the ice. Work with it instead." But even as Jake gave advice, he could see it would not help much. His classmates were not just struggling with the slippery surface. Their bodies were shutting down from the cold. Even with their heating suits, the freezing temperature was affecting them in ways Jake could barely understand. Nexara's crystal-like skin was developing frost patterns that made her movements slow and stiff. Zixthara's compound eyes were starting to fog over, making it hard for her to see clearly. And Gralt Moon's reptilian body was becoming sluggish as his blood cooled down. Jake looked ahead at the maze that stretched out before them. The walls were 20 feet high and made of solid ice. There were bridges overhead connecting different sections, and he could see multiple levels going both up and down from where they stood. Somewhere in the center of all this frozen complexity was the data crystal they needed to find. They had less than 2 hours to reach it, and the clock was already counting down. "I think we should work together," Nexara said, though her normally beautiful voice was becoming harsh and rough in the cold air. "We can combine our knowledge and figure out the best path to take." Before anyone could answer, the maze suddenly began to move. Walls slid apart with loud grinding sounds. Pathways that had been clear just moments before became blocked. New routes opened up while others disappeared completely. The 30-minute change had begun, just like Professor Kelmtar had warned them. Jake watched the transformation with growing excitement instead of fear. The moving walls were creating new opportunities, new paths that could be used by someone who knew how to move fast on ice. While his classmates huddled together in confusion, Jake was already calculating angles and speeds in his head. "We need to map out the maze step by step," Graltamoon said through chattering teeth. His Dreknari body was not supposed to react to cold this way, but the extreme temperature was affecting even his alien physiology. "We can create a reference system and track our progress." "That will take too much time," Jake said softly. "The maze changes every 30 minutes. By the time we map one layout, it will be completely different." "Then what do you think we should do?" Zixathara asked. Her antennae were drooping with exhaustion and cold, and she could barely keep her balance on the ice. Jake looked down at the perfectly smooth surface beneath his feet. Then he looked at the curved walls stretching ahead of them. In his mind, he could see the patterns of movement, the physics of momentum and reflection, the way objects moved on frictionless surfaces. "I think we should stop looking at this as a puzzle to solve," he said, pushing off gently from the wall to show how stable he was on the ice. "We should start thinking of it as a course to run." With those words, Jake bent his knees and pushed off hard from the wall behind him. His classmates watched in amazement as he glided smoothly across the ice surface, moving faster than any of them could walk even on solid ground. He used the walls like bumpers, pushing off from them to change direction and build up speed. When he reached the first corner, he leaned into the turn just like he was taking a curve on the hockey rink back home. His movements were fluid and natural, as if he had been born to move on ice. Behind him, he could hear Professor Kelmtar's surprised voice coming through the observation speakers that were mounted throughout the maze. But Jake was not paying attention to her words. He was focused on the path ahead and the feeling of pure freedom that came from moving at high speed across the frozen surface. His classmates were still back at the starting point, struggling to take even basic steps. Zixathara had fallen down twice more, and her chitinous shell was showing small cracks from the stress of the cold temperature. Graltmoon could barely move at all now, his reptilian metabolism slowing down to conserve heat. Even Nexara, whose crystal people should have been better adapted to cold environments, was showing signs of serious problems. Her normally bright inner light was getting dimmer and her movements were becoming jerky and uncontrolled. Jake carved through another turn, using the curved wall to maintain his momentum as he spiraled up to a higher level of the maze. The ice sang under his feet, a sound he remembered from countless winter days back home. Through his communication device, he heard Zixathara's weak voice asking, "Jake, are you actually having fun doing this?" Jake glided around another corner, his body automatically adjusting to the changing angles and surfaces. The question made him think for a moment. Was he having fun? In a way, yes, but it was more than that. "It is not about having fun," he replied as he slowed down to study 3 different paths ahead of him. "It is about understanding the environment instead of fighting against it." He chose the middle path and pushed off smoothly, building speed. Again. Behind him, far below, he could see his struggling classmates still trying to figure out how to take basic steps without falling down. The maze shifted again, walls sliding into new positions. But Jake had started to understand the pattern of changes. There was a logic to how the walls moved, a rhythm that reminded him of water flowing around rocks in a stream. "The ice is not your enemy," he called back through his communicator. "Where I come from, we have a saying about hockey. You skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it has been. You have to think ahead, adapt to changes, and work with the flow instead of trying to force your way through." Jake reached another decision point and had to choose between going up or down. His classmates were still in the lower sections, moving so slowly that they would never reach the center within the time limit. Their heating suits were using more and more power, and he could see the battery indicators dropping toward dangerous levels. Above him, he could see part of the maze's center section. There, suspended in a cage made of ice, was the blue data crystal they needed to retrieve. It pulsed with soft light, still far away but definitely visible now. Jake smiled and chose the upward path. He was starting to see the maze not as a barrier to overcome, but as a partner to dance with. Every wall, every turn, every surface was an opportunity to build momentum and move faster toward their goal. His classmates were learning about the limits of their environmental adaptation. Jake was learning something completely different. He was discovering that being human meant finding advantages in places where others saw only obstacles. The real test was just beginning. 20 minutes had passed since the trial began, and Jake had already covered more distance than his classmates could even imagine. While they were still struggling to walk without falling, he was treating the entire maze like the biggest and most exciting skating rink he had ever seen. Jake pushed off from another wall and tucked himself into a tight turn that sent him shooting down a narrow corridor at incredible speed. The secret was learning to read the ice surface. He could tell where it was perfectly smooth for maximum speed, and where tiny ridges might catch his foot if he was not careful. All those years playing hockey in Minnesota had taught him things that no school could ever explain. He understood ice in a way that went beyond thinking. His body knew how to move, how to balance, how to use momentum and physics to go exactly where he wanted to go. Through his earpiece, he could hear his classmates breathing hard and talking in desperate voices. Zixathara had fallen down 3 more times, and her hard insect shell was showing stress cracks from the terrible cold. Gralt Moon was moving so slowly now that he looked like he was walking through thick mud instead of gliding on ice. Even Nexara, whose crystal people lived on a cold planet, was having serious problems. Her normally bright inner light was getting dimmer and dimmer, and her movements looked jerky and wrong. "Jake," came Zixthara's voice through the communication system. She sounded very weak and tired. "Are you really enjoying this horrible test?" Jake carved through another perfect turn, using the curved wall to keep his speed as he spiraled up to a higher level of the maze. The ice made a singing sound under his feet, a noise that reminded him of winter days back home when everything was covered in snow and the world felt clean and new. "It is not about enjoying it," Jake replied, though he could not deny that he felt amazing moving this way. "It is about understanding the environment instead of fighting it like an enemy." He stopped at a place where 3 different paths met, quickly looking at each option. The maze had changed its shape again 10 minutes ago, but Jake was starting to recognize patterns in how the walls moved. There was a logic to it, like the way water flows around stones in a river. "The ice is not trying to hurt you," he continued, choosing the path on the left and pushing off smoothly to build speed again. "In my world, we have a saying about hockey. We skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it has already been. You have to think ahead, adapt to changes, and flow with what is happening instead of trying to force things to go your way." Below him, he could see his classmates still grouped together in one of the lower sections. They were moving at a pace that would never get them to the center of the maze in time. Their heating suits were working as hard as they could, but Jake could see that the power levels were dropping fast toward the danger zone. Jake reached another decision point. This time, it was a vertical shaft that went both up and down, with small handholds carved into the ice walls. His classmates would see this as just another obstacle, another problem to solve slowly and carefully. Jake saw it as an opportunity. He approached the shaft at full speed, timing his arrival perfectly. Instead of trying to climb like a normal person, he used his momentum to launch himself upward. He caught the handholds not to hold his weight, but to redirect his movement and send himself even higher. In just a few seconds, he was 2 levels higher than before. He emerged onto a platform that gave him a clear view of the maze's center section. There it was. The data crystal hung suspended in a cage made of ice, glowing with soft blue light. It was still far away, separated from him by at least 3 more sections of the complicated maze. But Jake could see the path now. Not the walls and barriers that blocked the way, but the flow lines and routes that would let him carry his speed from one section to the next. "I can see the target," he reported through his communicator. "But I think I can get there faster if I go alone. You are all fighting the environment instead of working with it." "Jake, no." Nexara's voice came through with crackling static. "The trial is designed for group cooperation. We are supposed to work together as a team. Sometimes, Jake replied, already planning his descent back to the main level. The best way to help the team is to show them what is actually possible. He launched himself down the shaft, using the walls to control his fall in a series of banking, moves that would have made his old hockey coach very proud. The ice sang beneath his feet as he landed, already moving at top speed toward the center of the maze. Behind him, his classmates were still having trouble with the most basic movements on the slippery surface. But Jake had moved beyond just dealing with the challenge. He was not navigating the maze anymore. He was dancing with it. The walls seemed to flow past him as he built up more and more speed. Each turn was perfect. Each push-off from a wall sent him exactly where he needed to go. Jake felt like he was flying, like he had become part of the ice itself. He could hear Professor Kelmtar's voice coming through the observation speakers, but her words were excited rather than worried. Other faculty members had joined her to watch, and Jake could see students from other classes pressed against the observation windows. Impossible, someone whispered through an open communication channel. His species should not be able to move like that on ice. But Jake was not thinking about what was supposed to be possible or impossible. He was thinking about momentum and angles, about the physics of moving on a surface with almost no friction. He was thinking about all the winter mornings when he had skated on frozen lakes that stretched to the horizon. Most of all, he was thinking about his classmates, who were still struggling far behind him. They needed help, but they also needed to see that the maze was not unconquerable. Someone had to show them that humans did not just survive in harsh environments. Humans found ways to thrive in them. The center section was getting closer now. Jake could see the final approaches, the curved walls and narrow passages that the maze designers had clearly intended to be the most difficult part of the entire trial. But as Jake studied the layout ahead, he realized something that made him smile. The designers had not been trying to make the maze harder for humans. They had accidentally made it perfect for someone who understood ice. The final section was not a trap. It was a half-pipe. Jake picked up even more speed as he approached the center, his mind already calculating the angles and trajectories he would need. His classmates thought this trial was about surviving the cold and reaching the goal. Jake was about to show them it was really about learning to fly. The final approach to the center of the maze was exactly what Jake had expected. The designers had built what they thought would be the most challenging section of the entire trial. The walls here were not just high but curved inward, creating a deep bowl shape that would trap most beings at the bottom, while the data crystal hung 20 feet above on a platform that could only be reached by crossing a series of narrow ice bridges. Jake's classmates had finally managed to reach the outer edge of this section, but he could see through his suit's display that their life support systems were now running on emergency power. Sixathera had collapsed twice in the last 10 minutes, and Graltmoon was barely conscious as his reptilian body shut down all non-essential functions to try to keep his core temperature stable. Jake, Professor Kelmtar's voice crackled through the communication system. Return to assist your teammates immediately. The trial parameters require group cooperation and, with respect, Professor, Jake interrupted politely, studying the curved walls around him with growing excitement. I think the trial parameters are about to change completely. What Jake had realized was something that would never have occurred to the alien designers. The bowl section was not a trap at all. It was a half-pipe, exactly like the ones he had seen skateboarders use back on Earth. The curved walls were perfect for what hockey players called working the boards, using the surface angles to build and maintain speed through turns that would otherwise be impossible. Jake started slowly to get a feel for the curve. He pushed off from one wall, glided smoothly across the bottom, up the opposite wall, turned, around, and reversed direction. Each pass built more momentum, and soon Jake was carving long, smooth arcs that took him higher up the walls with each repetition. Through the observation windows, he could see Professor Kelmtar's tentacles writhing, in what he now recognized as amazement rather than concern. Other faculty members had joined her, along with students from different classes who had heard about the humans' completely unconventional approach to the trial. Impossible, he heard someone whisper through an open communication channel. His Species should not be able to move like that on any surface, let alone ice. But Jake was not thinking about species limitations or what was supposed to be theoretically possible. He was thinking about the physics of momentum, the exact angle of approach he would need to reach the ice bridges above, and the precise timing required to launch himself from the curved wall to the suspended platform. On his 7th pass through the bowl, he hit the perfect spot. Jake launched himself up the wall at maximum speed, his trajectory carrying him in a flawless arc toward EO, the lowest of the ice bridges. He landed with both feet already moving, using the bridge's narrow surface like a balance beam as he sprinted toward the center platform. Below him, his classmates watched in stunned silence as Jake covered the final distance to the data crystal. The blue light pulsed brighter as he approached, as if it sensed that someone had finally reached it. But instead of simply grabbing the crystal and declaring victory, Jake paused at the platform's edge. He looked down at his struggling classmates, then at the crystal, then back at his friends who were barely surviving in the brutal cold. Zixthara, Graltmoon, Nexara, he called down through his communicator. I need you to listen to me very carefully. The maze is going to shift again in 7 minutes. When it does, there is going to be a straight path from your current position to the exit. Look for Section 7, Corridor B. Follow that route immediately and get to the warming chambers as fast as you can. What about the crystal? Nexara managed to ask through her failing life support systems. Her voice was so weak that Jake could barely hear her. Jake looked at the pulsing blue object that represented success in the trial. Then he looked at his classmates below, who were on the verge of serious injury or worse from the cold. In the observation area, he could see Professor Kelmtar leaning forward, her tentacles completely still with attention. The crystal is not the real test, Jake said, though he still had not picked it up. The real test is understanding what each environment can teach you. This maze is not about surviving the cold. It is about learning to work with forces that are beyond your control. He paused, watching his classmates begin their slow retreat toward the exit path he had identified. Their movements were getting more erratic as hypothermia set in despite their thermal suits. Sometimes the best way to win is not to reach the goal first, Jake continued. Sometimes it is about making sure that everyone reaches it eventually. With those words, Jake finally grasped the data crystal. But instead of keeping it as proof of his victory, he immediately began calculating trajectories for his descent. He had a rescue mission to complete, and his classmates were going to need all the help they could get to make it out of the maze safely. The crystal felt warm in his gloved hand, but not as warm as the feeling in his chest when he thought about helping his friends. This was what being human really meant, not just surviving or succeeding, but making sure that others could survive and succeed too. Jake looked down at the bowl-shaped section one more time. Then he pushed off from the platform, beginning his controlled descent back to his classmates. The real challenge was not reaching the center of the maze. The real challenge was getting everyone out alive. As he glided down toward his struggling friends, Jake could hear excited voices coming through the observation speakers. Faculty members were talking rapidly in languages he did not understand, but their tone was clear. Something unexpected had happened today. Something that would change how they thought about environmental adaptation trials. Jake reached the bottom of the bowl and immediately skated toward his classmates. Graltmoon had collapsed completely, his blue scales now almost white with cold. Zixthara was barely standing, her compound eyes fogged over with frost. Nexara's crystal form was covered in ice that made her movements stiff and clumsy. New plan, Jake announced as he reached them. We are all getting out of here together, and we are doing it fast. He positioned himself to support Graltmoon's weight while staying mobile on the ice. Trust me, he said to all of them. I know exactly how to get us home. The maze began its final shift, walls sliding apart to reveal the straight corridor Jake had predicted. But his classmates were in no condition to take advantage of it on their own. That was okay. Jake had enough speed and skill for all of them. The data crystal pulsed in his pocket as he prepared to guide his friends to safety. The trial was almost over, but the most important part was just beginning. Jake's descent from the center platform was controlled chaos. He used a series of calculated risks that took him from ice bridge to curved wall, to the bottom of the bowl in under 30 seconds. His classmates were already trying to follow his directions toward the exit corridor, but their movements were becoming more and more erratic as the cold continued to shut down their bodies. "New plan," Jake announced through the communication system as he reached them. "Gralt, you stay with me. Zixthara, Nexara, I want you to link arms and follow directly behind us. Do not try to navigate on your own. Just trust the ice and trust me." "Trust the ice?" Zixthara's voice was so weak that Jake could barely hear her. Her compound eyes were barely focusing on anything. "It is trying to kill us." "No," Jake said firmly, positioning himself to support Gralt weight as the Draknari's legs gave out completely. "It is trying to teach you something important. Every surface, every angle, every bit of momentum is information. You have been treating the ice like an enemy when it could have been your partner all along." The maze began its final shift, with walls sliding apart to reveal the straight corridor that Jake had predicted would appear. But his classmates were in no condition to take advantage of this easier path. Their alien bodies, which had evolved for stable and comfortable environments, were shutting down in cascade failures that their thermal suits could not prevent. "I cannot go on," Gralt mumbled, his blue scales now completely pale and rigid with cold. "Leave me here. Save yourselves while you still can." "That is not how we do things where I come from," Jake replied without hesitation. He positioned himself behind the failing Draknari, then began to push, using the same principles that had carried him through the maze with such grace. "Nexara, Zixthara, grab onto Gralt arms. Trust me completely." With all four beings connected in a chain, Jake began to skate backward, pulling his classmates along the smooth ice surface. It was exhausting work. Instead of the elegant momentum conservation he had used to navigate by himself, he was now fighting friction and dead weight with every movement. But his years of hockey had prepared him for this too. He had been the smallest player on many teams, learning to use technique and understanding of ice physics to overcome opponents who were larger and stronger than him. "How is this possible?" Nexara gasped as they glided smoothly down the corridor toward safety. "How did you know the maze would change exactly like this?" "Pattern recognition," Jake panted, adjusting their trajectory to take advantage of a slight downward slope that would help their momentum. "The maze is not random at all. It is designed to teach adaptation skills. Each configuration builds on the previous one, presenting different challenges but also creating new opportunities for those who understand the system." Through the observation windows, Jake could see Professor Kelmtar pacing back and forth excitedly. Her tentacles were gesturing wildly as she spoke to the other faculty members. Whatever they were discussing seemed to be generating considerable interest and surprise. "The thing about ice," Jake continued as they approached the final turn before the exit, "is that it is completely honest. It follows the laws of physics exactly. No exceptions, no mercy, but also no malice or evil intent. If you understand the rules, you can work within them successfully. If you fight against them, you will lose every single time." The exit chamber's warming lights were visible ahead, promising relief from the brutal cold that had nearly claimed his classmates' lives. But Jake was not thinking about the successful completion of the trial or the grade he would receive. He was thinking about the bigger implications of what they had all learned today. "In my species' history," he said as they finally crossed the threshold into warmth and safety, "we had to adapt to environments that actively tried to kill us, ice ages that lasted for thousands of years, frozen oceans, mountains covered in snow and ice. We did not survive by avoiding the cold or hiding from it. We survived by learning to thrive in conditions that would destroy other forms of life." Medical teams rushed forward to assist his hypothermic classmates as soon as they entered the warming chamber. Jake helped transfer Gralt to a medical stretcher, making sure the Draknari was stable before letting the doctors take over. As the medical teams worked to treat his classmates, Jake looked back at the maze that had nearly claimed them all. But now he saw it differently, not as a test of survival or endurance, but as an introduction to possibilities that most species never even considered. Professor Kelmtar approached him as the medical teams continued their work. "That was completely unprecedented," she said. her translator struggling with what seemed to be strong emotional undertones in her voice. You completed the trial in 47 minutes, which is a new record by more than an hour. But more importantly, you demonstrated something that we had not anticipated was even possible. What is that, Professor? Jake asked, still breathing hard from the exertion of pulling his classmates to safety. Environmental adaptation is not just about surviving hostile conditions, she explained. Your species does not just endure environments that would be lethal to others. You find ways to excel in them, to turn them into advantages that no one else can match. Jake nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn on him. That is what humans do, Professor. We do not just adapt to the world as we find it. We figure out how to make any environment work for us, even when it seems impossible. As his classmates were wheeled away to the medical bay for treatment and recovery, Jake looked once more at the ice maze through the observation windows. Tomorrow there would be other trials and other challenges designed to test the limits of interspecies cooperation and environmental adaptation. He was already looking forward to them with anticipation rather than fear. In the end, the trial had not been about reaching the center of the maze first, or even about retrieving the data crystal successfully. It had been about discovering that sometimes the greatest advantage is not avoiding your weaknesses or limitations. Sometimes it is about turning your natural strengths into something that others never expected was possible. The ice had taught them all something important that day. For his classmates, it was a lesson about the real limits of their environmental adaptation capabilities. For Jake, it was a reminder that being human meant finding opportunity and advantage in the exact places where others saw only obstacles and dangers. And for Professor Kelmtar and the entire Galactic Academy, it was the beginning of a fundamental reassessment of what they thought they knew about environmental adaptation and the remarkable species that seemed to specialize in turning every challenge into a playground for success.